Welcome to CCNA Labs, Cisco for the real world. My name is Jeremy Chara, and I'll be hanging out with you throughout this series, which is actually already done. It's kind of weird, but I always record the very first opening nugget as the final piece of the series because I really want to have a good idea of what's in it. The series that I create are kind of fluid, so we kind of add things as we need to and so on. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And I want to just give you a few things to think about as you jump into this series because I think it'll really set your mindset in the right way to take in this series. First thing I want to do is talk about the purpose. I mean, you might have seen on CBT Nuggets website, there's already ICND 1 and ICND 2, which is the series that map to the CCNA exam objectives. It's the best way to prepare for the CCNA exam. So you might say, well, why have another CCNA series? Well, a couple of reasons. And I'll give them to you in my priority when I was creating this series. This series actually came to me as an idea. I was talking with a friend who was getting into Cisco, and he and I were just kind of chatting while I was working in the middle of stuff, and he's like, yeah, I'm almost there. I'm ready to take the exam. I've got it scheduled. And I was like, oh, well, I said, do you want some practice? And he goes, yeah, sure. And I said, well, tell you what, I've got a client. I'm going to be installing a firewall at his site. It wasn't a Cisco firewall, granted, to give this, cut him some slack. But it was a Sonic wall. They had decided to go with Sonic wall as the firewall. I was like, it's brand new in the box, little TZ210 over there. Why don't you grab that out? I was like, here's the public IP, here's the private IP. Just set that up and make it do NAT. Set that up. And I started working on some other stuff. And about 10 minutes in, he's like, Jer, I'm stuck. And I was like, oh, well, let me look. And he had actually got into the firewall, had a default IP. And by the way, if you haven't played with Sonic wall firewalls before, they're very, I don't want to say very easy, but they're just web-based administration, kind of point and click, 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 click. And he had gotten into the web interface, and he was just like, I don't know what to do. Long story short, eventually I found out, there was just a lot of key pieces. Like, my friend knew it all in his head. Like, he had studied CCNA, he had read the books, he'd even gone through a lot of the CBT Nuggets videos on CCNA, and so it was in his head, but there was like this link that was missing, between it's like a doctor who reads a book but has never really touched a scalpel, and you're his first patient. You don't want to be there. So that's kind of the perspective that I came from, and I was like, what's missing? And I was just thinking there's got to be a link that can give people that bridge between the concept and the real world. And the only thing that could come to my mind is just apprenticeship. That to me is really what education should all be about, is almost like an apprenticeship, to where the best way to learn is not just to go at it with Google and try and find the answer yourself. Oh man, for instance, I've been trying to get into the Linux world and really learn Linux, and how to script with PHP and all that kind of stuff, and for years I just always would start on it and I just get bored, or I just couldn't get there. There was just something that was missing. And I sat with a friend of mine named Kurt, for about 4 hours, and he's just a stud on PHP and Linux, and I'm watching him and just taking notes, and I'm just like, don't slow down for me. I was just, do your stuff, and I just want to watch, and I'll ask questions. And I was just watching him, and I was like, okay, what'd you do? And I'm telling you, after about 4 hours of sitting with that guy, I'm like, I want to learn PHP, and I know exactly what I need to do to get started. So that was, I would say, the primary reason I created this series. Is coming out of that, I was like, I want to be able to create a series that gives that apprenticeship sort of feel, to where it's not just me talking about concepts and then being like, oh yeah, here's how you configure OSPF and all that. I want to create a series with a group of scenarios that are lab based, that's very real world, that I can walk through and kind of show somebody how to do what I'm doing. So that was the primary. The secondary that I thought with this is now with GNS3 that I'm going to talk about, creating labs for Cisco is a reality. And I wanted to be able to give you guys a whole bunch of hands-on to where I could just create the lab scenarios. I could create the labs because again, it's one thing to tell somebody, oh yeah, you can study Cisco with GNS3, and they number one have to figure that out and how to set that up. But number two, I mean when you it's like when you first got into Cisco. If you've been in Cisco for a little bit, think back to studying. You might have bought a couple routers off of eBay, and you get them in the mail, and you get them there on your desk, and you're like, okay, uh, what do I do now? And it's the same thing with GNS3. It's a way cool emulation environment, but it's kind of like a lot of people get it running and then they go, okay. Well, looks like I got a router emulator. Got your standard router emulator. I mean, it's kind of like, what do you do now? So I really wanted to give a framework for how to use and how to study, and just some practical labs. So that's the main purpose for the series. Now, about halfway through preparing my outline and just kind of thoughts for this, I suddenly had this idea of now, this would be very cool. And by the way, let me add in a third purpose, which is very short, but it actually had a lot to do with why this series is here. Somebody asked me about a book. They go, "Hey, have you ever read a book called Network Warrior?" And I was like, no, but it sounds cool. Just with that name, I want to go read that book. And he goes, oh, you got to check it out. So I did. I got this book called Network Warrior. This is it off of Amazon. And I know the print is one. Hang on, let me blow this up. Network Warrior. It says everything you need to know that wasn't on the CCNA exam, and I was like, an appropriate title. So I started looking at it, and I was like, what an amazing book! I mean, it goes through. It's so real world, not just like, oh, here's a router, here's host name, and things like that. Of course, that's in there, but like, it gets into politics. It gets into how not to be a jerk when you're an IT guy. I mean, it's just such a good book, and I was like, man, that would be awesome to be able to do a series that really wasn't just prohibited by the scope of the CCNA exam. For instance, something you'll run into all the time in the real world is documentation. There's not a bit of documentation on the CCNA exam, or what is the best practice to do documentation, or how to approach troubleshooting, and all those kind of things. Just like those are total real world, which is why I named this CCNA Labs Cisco for the real world, but it's not something you'd find on the exam. So I wanted to be unshackled from exam objectives. Now, I'll say that loosely because, of course, there's so much. I mean, you can see how much training there is on CBT nuggets of the Cisco world and network world. So there's tons of stuff that you could learn, but I really wanted to scope this to say, these are just the things that you'll need for the real world. So now take that and let me bring that into the user-guided side of things. When I was brainstorming this, I was kind of loosely basing it around some of the network warrior concepts that he was doing of just let's go beyond the CCNA, and I thought to myself, who am I? Who am I to say that I know everything that people are going to run into in the real world? I mean, I do consulting all the time. I have my own technical company called Easy IT, where we do. It's essentially an outsourced IT department for small businesses, and so I have a lot of real world experience, but I mean, there's stuff that I don't encounter that people deal with every day. So I talked to Dan, the owner of CBT Nuggets, and I was like, what if we do this? What if we do kind of an experiment with a user-guided series, which I said, let's post this to the CBT Nuggets blog, the CBT Nuggets Facebook page. I want to get people's guidance to go to turn to you and the people all around you and say, what do you run into in the real world? What if you have a CCNA? What nailed you that you weren't prepared for, even with your CCNA? Because that's what I want to add to the series. So throughout this whole series, there was a feedback forum open, and you're going to hear me throughout the series refer to XYZ person said this, and they said that, and they said this, and so there was just a lot of guidance from the whole community to put this series together, which actually worked really well. There's a lot of topics I never would have added. For instance, I added in site-to-site VPNs. As a matter of fact, that became a major link to connect our offices in this series. So a lot of that was just from the user community. That's my little coffee cup there, the mad scientist at work. I'm just trying this great experiment, and I think it went really well. So now let me hit these last few things. Number one, The CCNA Labs, this whole series is based around the GNS3 lab engine. If you haven't heard of GNS3, go to gns3.net, and it is actually a free Cisco emulation tool allowing you to emulate Cisco devices. A lot of people say simulate, but that's actually not what it is. It's an emulation because it's the real Cisco IOS that it uses. So let me show you. This is our topology that we're going to be using. Now, this is the final topology by the time this series was said and done. But the goal of this series is we are actually building a branch office called the Nugget Labs branch office. And we kind of build this thing out throughout this. You'll see it build as we go. But this is the topology in GNS3. And I'm going to provide all the files that you need to import this topology into a GNS3 environment so you can work through the labs themselves. And I'll provide all the labs and all that. But I realize that GNS3 may be new to you. What I will suggest is that you go check out this is gns3.net, and it again is free. It's actually written by a guy named Jeremy, appropriate, but not me. He actually is in France. And if you click on documentation, I didn't even know this until I started this series, but they put a link in here to a video that I did some time ago explaining how to use GNS3. Now, the reason I'm going this route instead of through the CBT Nuggets site is because it's linked right here, and CBT Nuggets, in all their graciousness, made it free to where. Oh, I'm hearing myself. But this is a completely free, I'll call it bonus nugget that you'll get to go through. GNS3 explains the setup of it, things that you might run into, things to watch out for, all that kind of stuff. That is how to work GNS3. So if you haven't had any experience, I would with GNS3, I would commend that to you to go check out the GNS3 nugget and work through that. So last thing I want to talk about, and then I'll launch you into it, is my recommendations for the series. And now that I'm at the end of the series, actually, I would say they've changed since my original vision. This series is really a combination of labs that I'm walking through. In the beginning, I'll say you'll want to just probably watch the nuggets just like you do any other CBT Nuggets series. You might get a little ahead of it by saying, okay, this is what I would do, but really the opening of the CCNA Labs series is about documentation. It's about going through, making sure you've got all of your I's dotted, your T's crossed, you've talked with management, you've gone to the meetings, you're doing a design for the network. That's one thing I did add is how do you design the network? How do you buy the equipment? Where do you, answers all those kind of questions. So I would say those are just kind of hit those right on the kind of design framework for the series. From there, it's going to get into the configuration, and you'll know it. You'll see that the titles will change from kind of documentation into phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, to where I'm going through and implementing this branch office network in a phased approach. Let's, first off, cable the infrastructure. Let's then get into the switch configuration, set up the VLAN, set up layer 3 switching, all of those kind of things I'm going to work through. Now, when you're getting into those phases, I'm going to be giving you the labs themselves for you to use in GNS3. So I would recommend, if you're feeling like I'm a Cisco stud, I'm going to go at it, I'm just preparing for the exam, I'm ready to go, I would say go at those labs without watching the nuggets, without watching me walk through them, because that's really what the majority of the series is me taking a lab, reading through it, and then walking through not only the thought process and some explanation. I give kind of like an overview of the concept. For instance, if I'm setting up OSPF, I'll give an overview of OSPF, some of the intricacies before I configure it. But really, that's what the series is. It's just a series of lab walkthroughs. Think of me as your answer key. So if you're at the point where you're like, wow, I'm ready to take the exam, let me test my skills, then go at it. You do the exam, do the labs, and then watch the videos based on I want to find out what the answer is, or Jeremy's explanation on how to get to the answer. Now, if you're new into the Cisco world and maybe you don't feel super confident, then I would just say watch the series. Don't even worry about doing GNS3 yet unless you're feeling like you really want to. Maybe watch phase two, for example, which is the implementation of the switch network, and then stop right there and then try it yourself. Get that hands-on, because there's enough in these labs that you're not going to remember just by watching what I did. You're not going to remember all the solutions. So, jog your own memory. See if you can figure it out. And I've got to emphasize that so much. See if you can figure it out. If you get stuck, rather than just going to the answer key, because I provide a little answer key with each one, and figuring out what command it is, Google it. I mean, treat yourself like a real world engineer, and do what we all do. Run to Google and type in, I can't set up the VLAN, or what is a VLAN? And start learning those concepts, because that really is a way to gain a lot of experience. So that's my recommendations based on, again, the position that you're coming from as you get into this series. So I think that's everything that I had. I wish you luck, and I really hope you enjoy this series. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.